For the capital V, you start out establishing your letter width, and it'll be at the top, and then you want to transfer that axis all the way down so that you know where your center point is on the bottom, and that's your target. So you simply take a flattened brush, strike a thin line from the left side top corner down to that center point between those two axis lines, and that'll center your V and also italicize it. You do the same with the other side, the right side. Flat brush, pointed in the direction you're going towards that lower center point, and now you've established your V. Now all you have to do is flatten your brush, make a thick stroke on the left side, starting from the top, just below the top line. Bringing it on down, straight in, flare it a little bit, and then just fill in that little gap. Now at this point, all you have to do is flatten your brush, make two serifs with a horizontal flat brush, and whatever length you make this serif, you make this length of the serif on the other side as well. Then you flatten your brush, round off the serifs, starting with a thick stroke, no spinning here. Just dragging your brush down to an arc, and this one you do spins counterclockwise, but the other side you do not spin. You actually arc the stroke, bringing it around to meet the thin stroke. So basically you're just making an arc with your brush. The lowercase v is very similar, where you want to establish your letter width, top and bottom. That way you have your center point down at the bottom. You know exactly where to go. And then you start out with a flat brush, striking the same beginning stroke as you would for an I. That slight arced, same 45-degree, slightly arced, thin stroke. Then you're going to go ahead and flatten out your brush again, and this will be the similar stroke as an I, but this time you're going to head down towards that center point rather than following the axis, obviously. So it's just below the top point of that, and you're going to come around and back to the right to meet that point. So it's nice graceful sweep, and then flatten your brush out, tuck it in, just like you've been doing. Push down, flare out. As you come down, start to lift up and spin counterclockwise to meet that point again. Then you're going to flatten your brush out to make the thin stroke on the right side, starting at the top, just below the top line, at a 45-degree angle the other way, and then you're just going to follow that stroke down to meet that point. Don't make this too curvy. Make it more straight. It looks better. And then just finish that off. And the top little circular ending at the very top, you're just going to start at the very tip, and you're going to make a left side ellipse, bringing it around and swing it right into the stroke. Just like the capital M, make the W a thick stroke width wider than the other capitals. I've experimented with this quite a bit. Anything beyond this looks very strange with the other capitals. Locate your bottom points just a little over halfway from the outside axis lines. I'm executing these first two strokes with thick strokes with my brush flat, but it's much more accurate to go ahead and make these strokes using the thin stroke method, just like we did for the V. The goal for the second thick stroke is to make it parallel with the first stroke, coming down to meet your point at the bottom. If you do use a thick stroke method, you'll again need to stop quite a bit short of the bottom so that you can finish off that lower point with the thin stroke. Next, you're going to want to do the very far right side thin stroke, starting from that top corner and meeting your bottom point with the brush flat and going in the direction of the stroke. Fill in your little white space there. Now you're going to want to make this next stroke parallel with that thin stroke you just made. Not from the top point, but parallel. No matter where it ends up along that thick stroke, just be sure it's always parallel with that other thin stroke. That will make the W look much more uniform, to have those two strokes parallel with each other. And the goal is to make those three negative space triangles as equal as possible. Go ahead and do your serifs. There's only 3 on the top, but make them all the same length. And in those negative triangles, I will backtrack a little and mention that that far right upper triangle will be a little larger than the other 2. Then go ahead and round off your serifs. Flat brush, following a radius, right into your thick strokes. And for your thin stroke, you will be bringing the brush down around and spinning counterclockwise. This one you will just radius right into the thin stroke. Lowercase w begins just like the lowercase v, with the same stroke at the beginning. Same flattened brush with a swoop meeting the bottom peak, and those peaks can be split up in thirds with the width of the stroke coming out, out, in, back in to meet that point. Flatten out your brush, shove it in that peak, flare it out, spin the brush clockwise to meet that point, since it's at an angle going the other way. Then to go just left of center of this thin stroke, so that the thick stroke will end up in the center of the letter. So it's just a little left of center, and just bring it with a nice graceful sweep down to the point. Now you can flatten out your brush, and this is going to be a thick stroke, starting with your brush flattened and horizontal. And you're going to go ahead and spin slightly clockwise to make that tapered stroke. And then you're just going to repeat that stroke to make this the width of the stroke your thick stroke. Spin it clockwise. And then the final thin stroke, right side thin stroke, is going to be similar to the V, whereas you start just below the top line. Begin with a 45-degree brush to create that top upper finish, and then come back sweeping around to meet your lower point. Again, don't make that too much of a curve or swoopy. Keep it more kind of just graceful. Graceful sweep, almost straight. And then clean it up. Make things look nice and smooth. And for that top, you just start at the very top and make a left ellipse. Just bring it around into the thin stroke. There's an optical trick that you need to be mindful of with the capital X. If you look at these two X's, you'll see that the one on the left is much more visually superior than the one on the right. The reason is because we have raised the lower left leg thin line up a thin stroke, creating more space on the bottom part of the letter than the top part, which is always more ideal. In this layout, you'll see that in the width of the stroke, you want to bring it down to that point, but you want to be sure that your thick strokes meet at the point at the top and the point at the lower right hand. So you got to be mindful of that distance so it doesn't go off too far. And then at the top, you want to bring it down as if you were going to head down towards that lower left corner. But then that actual lower left leg will be raised a bit, just about a little more than a thin stroke. So you're going to begin with a thick stroke, being mindful of starting from the top inside corner and bringing your stroke down to the inside corner on your right side of your stroke. So you're going to stay away from that corner down there because you're going to make a thicker stroke. And it's a good time to make a nice flare at the top and bottom as well. Gives a little pizzazz to the letter. So now you're going to come down and you're going to start to flare out towards the right, towards that bottom stroke. Now you know you've met that stroke and the letter width is accurate. Then you're going to come down from that top corner, aiming for that lower bottom left corner. You're just going to head for it. And then the lower thin stroke, left thin stroke, you're going to start out just above the last stroke you just made and bring it right down into that lower left corner. It just looks so much more visually pleasing to have that greater space on the bottom, more balanced visually. Now you're going to serif out of this letter with a flat brush, making each of the serifs the same length. I like to do all the serifs at the same time. In fact, all the strokes, multiple strokes at the same time, or similar strokes, I should say. That way your head and mind and eye are all in the same, on the same wavelength, and you're just making them all the same. It's like executing a stroke over and over again. That way you're mindful of the fact that they're all the same length. Then come back and round everything off. Starting out with a flat brush. And these, you just keep your brush horizontal for the thick strokes. Making a nice smooth radius right into the thick. Right into the thick. This one you're going to spin your brush counterclockwise. And the other one you're going to just make an arc with your brush right into the thin. This one you're going to start from the thin and then just make an arc right into the end of that serif. And then this one you're going to come in, you're going to just drop it right in, no spinning needed. It's just like a thick stroke at that point. This one too, thick stroke, no spin, right into the serif. The lowercase x can be a little tricky to execute, as long as you're mindful of the width of the letter first, of course, and where the end strokes end up in the ends or the edges of those axis lines. You're in good shape. Big important thing is to keep that intersection above the halfway point, and you should be in good shape with the letter. That lower left nodule that sticks out beyond the axis line, usually because of letter spacing, ends up being artistically tied in to the previous letter. If not, then it goes beyond the axis line as you see it there, to balance the whole letter out. Starting with a flat brush, 45-degree angle, making your first stroke. Nice, graceful, thin stroke, 45 curved. Flatten it out again. This curve won't be as radical as the eye. It's a little more graceful, a little less of a curve. Parallel with the capital X, just below the top point. Come down, out, and then back in front of your axis line. Flatten out the brush, tuck it in that top corner. And then you're going to want to flare out. As you push down, spin clockwise all the way around, spinning clockwise, and meet that lower point. Tapered. Flatten it out again. For the bottom terminal. Remember, those terminals are a 45-degree angle, like you're cutting down into the surface. That'll give you a nice beginning of the terminal. Top one, you want to flatten out your brush, starting out horizontal, right at the top of the guideline, the intersection meeting just above the halfway point. That's your target. And then as you come down, graceful sweep right above that halfway point, coming down and then meeting just past the axis point. below. Creating the last finishes, flat brush, pull in from your thin stroke on the top, sweep it down and up for a graceful ellipse. Same with the bottom. You're going to start at the end and pull up, making an ellipse, and then down, and then sweep back up into your thin stroke. Finish off the bottom so they're smooth and with a smooth transition. The lowercase x can be a little tricky to execute, as long as you're mindful of the width of the letter first, of course, and where the end strokes end up in the ends or the edges of those axis lines. You're in good shape. Big important thing is to keep that intersection above the halfway point, and you should be in good shape with the letter. That lower left nodule that sticks out beyond the axis line, usually because of letter spacing, ends up being artistically tied in to the previous letter. If not, then it goes beyond the axis line as you see it there, to balance the whole letter out. The capital Y begins with the lower stem along the axis, right in the dead center, and starting about halfway up between the two guidelines, the capital guidelines. Then you'll have a really solid A to B point for your preceding strokes. Make that thick stroke tie into the base, and then that thin stroke tie in to make a nice V shape. Beginning with a nice flat horizontal brush, make your stem the thickness of a thick stroke, overlapping your 50%, giving it a little taper. Then you go ahead and with a flat, thin brush, starting up at the upper left corner, aiming your brush at the angle you want to go from that A to B point. Go ahead and bring it down into that inside corner, and then overlap, bring it down to that outside corner. Flatten your brush again to execute the thin stroke, final stroke, and aim your brush at the angle and the direction of the cross inside of that intersection of that Y. Bring it straight on down. And then finish up with your serifs. Flattening out your brush, horizontal, keeping them all the same length. Flatten out again to round them off. No turning needed for the thick strokes, simply a horizontal brush and creating a radius, transitioning right into the thick stroke. Thin stroke, you're going to, on this side, you're going to spin slightly counterclockwise. On the right side, you're just going to draw it in right into the thin stroke. The lowercase y, with its V-like form but with obvious differences, begins with a flattened thin stroke for that in that upper corner, and with our beginning stroke, just like usual, arcing thin, 45 degree. Then flatten the brush again. Now you're going to bring that just below the top point, straight down to the baseline where the two strokes intersect, but you're going to come up short of that. There's a reason for that, just a little short. Now you're going to do that long drawing sweeping stroke, starting just like you do with the W and the B, with a flattened brush and a slight 45 degree angle, and then you're just going to bring it down and go towards that intersecting point where the two meet, and then sweep around halfway between the baseline and the descending baseline. That will give you your A to B point. Go ahead and round off the top and round off the bottom. Similar fashion, making an ellipse, drawing it up and then down, and then sweep it and draw it right into that, transition right into that thin stroke. Now you're going to go ahead and you're going to connect those intersecting points and then flatten out your brush and create that thick stroke just the way you would for the other letters, only you're going straight down. So come at a real 45-degree angle, push out a little bit, and come straight down to fill in that gap. For a super accurate capital Z every time, go ahead and start out with the 2 serifs. That'll give you your italic axis points, your width of your letter, and an A to B. Make the bottom one just a little bit longer than the top one for visual balance. Now go ahead and make your horizontal line. On the top and bottom. Now those 2 points will be your A to B. Now all you have to do is, with a chiseled brush, meet those 2 points starting from the top. And this will give you a real clear shot from that upper corner to the lower corner. Begin with a flat brush on the inside upper corner of the Z, bringing it straight down to the outside bottom corner, indicated by this red stroke. And then from there, you're going to flatten your brush and go up to the upper outside corner, bringing it down to flare out to make a nice, even, thick stroke all the way down. This also has a flare to it. This will give you a perfect Z every time. Here's your flat brush tucked in that corner. Taking into consideration making the thick stroke at that point, but bringing it down to a taper down to that point. Flatten out the brush. Make a nice corner peak, that outside corner, upper corner. Bringing your brush in the direction of the stroke, and then bring it down and taper it. Feather out right there. Then finish off with rounding your serifs. The top, flat brush, horizontal, inside of the thin stroke. You're going to draw towards the corner and spin clockwise, drawing it down into a taper. For the lower serif, you're going to have a vertical flat brush, and you're going to basically draw a radius, spinning your brush clockwise. Make the bottom serif on the Z a little longer than the top serif. It looks more visually balanced that way. The lowercase z is made the exact same way as the uppercase Z. Just be sure that you're making the letter width of the lowercase z the same as the letter width of the other lowercase letters.